All right. This is a seminar titled, What Do You Mean There's No Alcohol? And we're going to talk about sales and marketing strategies for NA beer. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Happy to answer them in order. First, I want to start with Happy Sober October. It's probably not the greeting you expected from me today. It might not even be on your radar, or perhaps you think Sober October is one of those marketing calendar events meant to sell beer, in this case, non-alcoholic beer. Whatever your thoughts, the dry months, October, January, and even July, they're on your drinker's radar. Let's take a look at some of the stats from 2022. So 35% of legal adults participated this year. And, it varied across the different formats of NA, beer, mocktails, wine, and spirits. And what might be even more surprising is the number of people who said that they were going to stick with it. Now, whether or not that played out over time remains to be seen, but 75% of those people who participated in Dry January said that they were going to continue drinking non-alcoholic beer, followed by spirits, mocktails, and even wine showed up on the radar. Now let's take a look real quick at the size of that market. Now it's estimated that NA beer this year in the United States is going to be about $6 billion with a B, $6 billion, and it's even bigger globally. Now we know from Bart Watson and the Brewers Association that craft beer is at or about 27 billion this year, and overall beer, of which craft and NA will be a part, is about 100 billion. So you could, quick math, say that 1 out of every 20 beers that is sold this year was non-alcoholic. Now that's nothing to sneeze about. But let's take a look at our non-alcoholic beer customer. So this is what we used to think they're different from us. Those folks don't drink for health reasons. They just don't like alcohol. They don't like to party. They're not social. Whatever the old school mentality is around non-alcoholic drinkers, we're suggesting that you need to reframe that story, because non-alc customers are just like you and I. They're craft drinkers. They appreciate craft. They might like to drink alcohol on the weekends, but really pace themselves during the week. They like to be in those social situations, and they like to have something in their hand because this is kind of currency. This is a security blanket to a certain extent. Whatever the reason, it feels good to be in a group of people with a can of non-alc in your hand. They also have reason to look for alternatives to drinking alcohol. That could be personal, it could be cultural, religious, it could be for health or lifestyle reasons, or it could just be pacing. Sometimes we call that sober curious. You're not all in, you're not going completely dry. You want to see what it would be like. What is the version of yourself that actually drinks less? You ever think about that? At Market Your Craft, we're suggesting that breweries need to take a position on non-alc, and we really call that a build or buy. And we're going to talk in this presentation a little bit about your options, and then specifically dive deep into the selling and marketing of a non-alc offering. You're going to leave today with those tools, a proven set of tools to really market your options and to attract those new drinkers. And my name is Scott Kolbe, and I work for a company called Market Your Craft. And what we do is help breweries, wineries, and distilleries build traffic, capture engagement and new sales, And now it turns out we're doing it for non-alcoholic as well as functional beverages because the story and the foundation of marketing and selling is very similar across all of those different beverages. And we've certainly been lucky over the years. We've had relationships with a bunch of fun brands to work on. And specifically today, I'm going to give a shout out to Partake Brewing, who's a client of ours, whose sole focus is non-alcoholic beer. And you're going to see that come up in the presentation today. So let's get started. What, if any, non-alc options are even available in your tasting room right now? If you're like most, the usual suspects look like water, soda, juice, and tea, and that checks the box. You've got something for everybody to drink. But also, this is an adult environment, and adult NA options look more like their alcoholic counterpart, non-alc beer, seltzer, hop waters and teas, even kombuchas, wines, and whiskeys. This isn't a children's play date. This is families going to breweries and wanting to have that same social interaction that they're used to and have a non-alc beverage in their hand that they can actually appreciate. But what you're going to run into, if you haven't already, is a little bit of that brewer ego. I didn't brew it. I don't want to serve it in my brewery. It's not going to be part of my tasting room. No. Non-alc doesn't have a place here. What we want to show you, if you haven't already gotten past this point, is that it really doesn't matter what we think. We need to understand what our customers and our drinkers want, because without them, we don't have a business to run. We can't keep the lights on. So I would challenge you to maybe look at it from a different perspective of, if we're going to get into non-alc, we're going to do it in the way that makes me feel good about what we offer, something that I like to drink, something that I would be proud to serve. So we're going to do a little bit of level setting. Most of you know exactly what we're talking about when we really dive into the idea of non-alcoholic. But specifically with non-alcoholic beer, we're talking about a cereal beverage instead of a malted beverage under TTB tax laws. And that's important because the sales on your beer, sales on your beer depend on that tax. TTB formula approval is needed once you finally get that recipe that you're really excited about. And then the FAA really regulates all of the malted beverages, and this is going to come into play with labeling. Something that's tripped a lot of people up, even in the alcoholic space, is how we market and distribute, how we can advertise. And non-alcoholic beverages fit squarely into the beer distribution model, fit 100% into the beer advertising model. And you'd say, well, why is that? You know, it's closer to a soda. It's closer to a water than it is. No, the US doesn't look at it that way. Distributors don't look at it that way. Your customer doesn't look at it that way. They're making the decision between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic option at shelf. And so they're shelved together. They're presented. They're displayed in the same area. Distributors have one hat that looks like alcoholic beer and the other hat that looks like non-alc beer. And they are asked to promote to a retail buyer. We've got these non-alcoholic options. They're going to be great for your customers during dry January. And then in addition, we've got stouts and porters and big dark beers that are going to be perfect for the winter. Understanding ABV is important. So the FDA takes a look at non-alc beverages as anything less than 0.5% ABV. And it's important to understand this because if you're brewing it yourself or if you're buying, you have to be very conscious of one, the final product and the ABV, two, the processes used to pasteurize and whatnot to halt any secondary fermentation so it doesn't have that issue that kombucha faced so many years ago, where they had secondary fermentation in the bottle, creating alcohol that was being consumed by underage. Now, the UK, just to look at it from a different geography perspective, they even go a little further and they talk about alcohol free being less than or equal to 0.05, barely any alcohol. De-alcoholized is kind of that same 0.5%, but then it's a big thing in Europe, especially low alcohol beers, very sessionable, drinkable beers being at or about 1.2% ABV, and then alcoholic counterparts being above. This comes into play, again, when you take a look at the number of people who are drinking, and if they're doing so for health reasons, or if there's pregnancy or something else involved that makes them a little more sensitive to the alcohol content, we can with confidence say what our beer is. So we think that, again, this is a micro view of it, but it's definitely a bigger trend that non-alcoholic beers really play an important role in a small to mid-sized brewery, mid to big, for these reasons. Think about during COVID. We're thankfully at the tail end of the worst of it, but diversifying checks was a big thing. How can we grow our checks? Well, if you offer non-alcoholic options, just like adding food, then you have the opportunity to grow those checks and appeal to a greater number of people on those checks, because you're giving everybody an option to drink when they visit you. There has been a big shift in drinker behavior. And how that looks to us is people are thinking more health consciously. They're balancing their lifestyles. They're moderating. And non-alcoholic options fit squarely within that and solves that problem. Importantly, though, when we're taking a build or buy position on non-alc, we have to take a look at the financial implications, of which there are many, and they could be great. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but it's worth noting that you can get into non-alc in a number of different ways already. If you haven't, you could build your own, and that's capabilities internally, recipes internally, going through the test and learn process and perfecting it. Definitely an option. You could lease or partner. Leasing de-alcoholizers isn't exactly a big market, and I don't know that there would be much, if any, cost efficiency in that, but there is that option. Partners, think of that as a contract brewer that has invested heavily in non-alcoholic de-alc and other filtration systems in order to offer that service line to not only alcoholic customers who want to have a non-alc option, but to non-alc solely or specific businesses who don't yet have the internal capacity or are looking to scale quickly. And then the last one is buying commercial. People who have figured this out. Now, Ben Jordan from ABV Technology gave a great presentation on the process and the equipment of brewing any beer. And so I'm not a scientist. I have an understanding of how this works. There are a couple different ways you can do it. You can halt the fermentation. You could really stop it before it really ferments to its full capacity. And that's stopping it short of that 0.5 threshold again. You can do that with a variety of methods. different yeast strains that perform better and produce those flavor profiles with less alcohol output. And then there's also de-alcoholization. And basically what that is brewing to full strength and then removing the alcohol. There are pluses and minuses to both. With the de-alc, you can do it through filters. You can do it with distillation. We have to be careful. If you've considered this, again, distillation is going to create a more concentrated and potentially a higher ABV. And when you do that, there's a whole different set of licenses that your brewery would have to take on. And then the evaporation model, again, at the lowest temperature possible, and maybe even with a vacuum system in order to lower that boiling point. There are breweries out there who have done this in some combination. When they first set out to do it, they had a lot of things to think about. And that's the recipe. How complicated is it? How true to a style do we want to be with the non-alc version? How much do I want to be able to play with it? How do I have to project in the initial batch, whether that's through halted fermentation or the de-alcoholization? How do I have to project what the final aroma, the flavor characteristics, what it's going to taste like, and work back from that and adjust for the process? Because you want to conserve those flavors. The last thing you want is to hand somebody a non-alcoholic IPA that tastes like a pale with no hop character, that tastes more like a malty blonde, a base beer. We talked about the special licensing. Some of these pieces of equipment and some of these processes can actually fall underneath your existing brewery license, which is great. And outputs, this is kind of fun. I don't know if you've dove deep into some of these de-alcoholizers, but you can actually produce a non-alcoholic beer and then maybe even a base seltzer like the ABV technology we talked about. And then controls and monitoring. Again, the science and the art of brewing. And with non-alc, it becomes even a little more sensitive. You don't have as much wriggle room. And then there's the dollars and cents of it. This is the equalizer from ABV, and I don't have any dogs in this race. I just thought the presentation that Ben Jordan gave was fascinating. And the technical solution that they came up with was a de-alcoholizer that uses a combination of filtration as well as the evaporation in order to produce two different products, one being the non-alc beer under 0.5%, and then the other being a base seltzer at the original ABV that entered the equipment, which I just thought was fascinating. But it comes with a price. And he quoted yesterday that the equalizer, the de-alcoholizer, starts at about $300K installed. Oof. If you have that kind of coin, then perhaps this is a great option for you. And if you really want to lean into it and you know that your customers are asking for it and you see the 5-year growth of this category for you justifying the upfront cost, then by all means, get in there. And there are a number of different providers of this service and tech. When you're extending this conversation to, okay, we have a capital investment, you also have to take a look at how this is going to be distributed. And the very same conversation that you might have with your head brewers or your production team, that's going to go on in the business office as well, because we're talking about kegs versus cans. Now, if I'm a small to mid-sized brewery and I have a non-alcoholic offering, whether that's something you can brew yourself using a halted fermentation or a hop tea or a hop water or some offering that kind of gets your foot in the door, then you're going to ask yourself the question, okay, locally, I've got a clientele who would be happy to drink that on draft. And so you can keg it. If you've got a bigger footprint, regionally, multi-state, you might be thinking, okay, how practical is it for me to keg a non-alcoholic beer and distribute it by my normal means? And so then you might think about canning. And when you think about canning, there's all the science, again, behind making sure that what makes it to the drinker's lips is exactly what you intended, the product that was put in the can before it left your brewery. And that comes with, baggage of pasteurization and other chemical processes that you may not have had to worry about with your kind of small regional presence. And then there's retail strategy and everything included in sales and marketing of that non-alcoholic beer outside of your tap room, shipping, delivery, distribution network. And then maybe it takes off, and I certainly hope it does, and you need to scale quickly. Maybe there's a contract brewer in your future. It's exciting, but then you are handing over the keys and trusting another brewer with your recipe. We have to make sure that they protect the intellectual property that is your process, your recipe, and they are producing just as stellar a non-alc beer as you would produce yourself. Again, leasing and partnering may not be efficient, cost effective, may not be an option for you, but ABV Tech talked about, kind of a break-even model. And the way they looked at it was if you were brewing fewer than 8,000 barrels, most of the folks probably watching this are a small to mid-size, and 8,000 might be on the high side. If you have fewer than those, you might consider partnering with the likes of like a Bootstrap. Bootstrap is right down the street from Market Your Craft here in Colorado, and they've been known to brew non-alcoholic on contract. They're using the ABV setup. You would also take a look at the network of partners that are actually using the technology that you really line up with and see if a partner relationship could be had there. Now, lastly, again, another option to get your foot in the door with non-alcoholic is buying. You cut to the chase. You and your team find a non-alcoholic beer that you really like. You bring it in. Talk to your distributor rep. You offer it as a craft non-alcoholic beer option right alongside the crowlers of your core beers, the bottles and bombers of your specialty beers. It becomes part of the conversation, which is what we're going to talk about as far as sales and marketing these options. You get to choose from the best, the award winners, the ones that have the biggest awareness. You want people to go for that can in the cooler, to call for that at the bar. You're also more or less guaranteed the quality and security and safety are going to be there. Because, again, these are proven players in the market. They're multi-state, if not multi-country, and they've figured pasteurization and other safety mechanisms out. Plus, they've got dollars and teams working on building brand awareness in your region and beyond. This is an eye chart, but it's not exhaustive. That's the thing. These are the commercial brands that are out there doing something with non-alcoholic, some of which are solely dedicated to non-alcoholic beer. Now, I'm going to shout out to, again, my friends at Partake Brewing. They're the #1 non-alcoholic beer in Canada, and they've had huge success expanding into the US market. And it's easy to see why, because they've got great tasting, on style, on point brands. They're all fewer than 30 calories, low carb, low calorie, and they've got great flavor, great taste, and they're award winning. So when you think about potentially bringing in rather than buying, those are some of the things that you have to consider. Now, strategies for selling. You've made the commitment, either prior to this video or after this video, that Scott, you sold me. Non-alcoholic is a thing. I've been avoiding it. We're going to lean into it. All right. These are the kind of conversations that the team at Market Your Craft has every day. How do you market and sell your main brands, your mainline brands, as well as secondary brands like your non-alcoholic offering? It all starts with knowing your drinker. And like we saw in the beginning, it's not that alien who doesn't look anything like us. It's me, you, it's our neighbors, it's craft drinkers, it's people who are looking for options, educated, willing to pay a premium for not only a craft beer, but a craft non-alcoholic beer. They're seeking this out. They want a quality experience. And if they're going to go all day watching a game, alternating between a full strength and a non-alcoholic, they're going to choose the one that tastes the best. Because being social without all the consequences is probably on the docket for tonight. They want to go a little longer. They want to be in a little more control. Again, we talked about the 21 to kind of 30, 35 sweet spot of the drinkers who are graduating right now to products that are healthier for you. They fit their lifestyle, fit their mindset, align with their moral compass, because these folks are curious and confident about themselves and about the products that they buy. Craft non-alcoholic is very similar to craft alcoholic beer. But we have the additional hurdle, if you will, challenge to sell the category as well as the brand. And so create occasions, reasons for somebody to say yes. And it's not just non-alcoholic beer. If you're trying to sell any product or service, you want your customer or potential customer to have an easy route to yes. And so how do we do that with non-alcoholic? You start to think about how crushable it is, the occasion that they might be drinking a non-alcoholic beer. Again, those healthy lifestyle choices that these folks are making. Could you see yourself potentially sponsoring a 5K, a half marathon, a bike race, being, the NA sponsor at the finish line? What a neat opportunity for someone who just finished and probably achieved a goal to have in their hand your product. We get into sampling and budgets with that conversation, but think creatively. Figure out a way to get the product into people's hands with sampling. Think about collaborations. Collaborations in the craft beer space are very prevalent because it exposes your audience to someone else's audience and vice versa. You're expanding your network of craft beer drinkers when you collaborate with a partner that aligns with your way of thinking. The same is true with non-alcoholic. If you can be close to style, then it's even easier for people who are substituting. You know what? I might have a full strength IPA and then have a non-alcoholic IPA. The extent to which you bridge that gap between the two, it's going to make it easier for them to say yes to pacing with the non-alcoholic. It's important to know, and we've learned this in our time with Partake, non-alcoholic beer is not a one-for-one replacement. And if you were to be a craft drinker and you have a big, meaty chocolate imperial stout, and I were to tell you, hey, guess what? I've got a deliciously flavorful, chocolate forward, non-alcoholic imperial stout, that person likely is going to say, I see what you're trying for, but it's too much of a jump. But that's not what we're going for. We're not necessarily going for a direct replacement. I am going to only drink non-alcoholics from this point forward because you convinced me that non-alcoholic chocolate imperial stout is better than the real thing. I would argue that a lot of the non-alcs are better than the American light lagers that we might have in the shelves. But regardless, it's not a one for one. And so if you look at it just slightly differently, you'll see, again, trying to create the occasions to say yes is not yes to replacing my full strength. Complementing it is a better way to look at it. I don't mean to point fingers. These are some of the pioneers in the American non-alcoholic beer industry, O'Doul's. Now, it also carried with it a little bit of a stigma, which has been difficult, quite honestly, in the past 5 to 10 years for true non-alc players to overcome, because everybody in their mind either has a first experience that they can reference, or they referenced it secondhand from somebody else who said, O'Doul's, woof, it's the worst. I mean, that's a big hurdle to overcome, right? Quality and flavor are no longer an issue. And the more we as craft brewers, the craft brewing community, lean into the idea of non-alcoholic, we will be the ones who are making a difference. We will be the ones who are elevating the craft and the quality. And so it's not an issue anymore. And so those negative stigmas and association related to non-alcoholic craft beer in the past will be exactly that, a thing of the past. Now, I don't know who originally said it, but I sure like to think that Ken Grossman from Sierra Nevada said this, and we've all heard it. It's all ships rise with the tide. And the same is very much true for this category, more so even than what we've seen and experienced with hard seltzers over the last couple of years. We can see what's happening with that. Non-alc has a much longer runway. And so to the extent that we all lean into it, we are going to improve and make better the category. I would ask, what makes you different? If you've seen any of our presentations in the past, we really like to understand you versus them, because 9 times out of 10, if a customer hasn't experienced you before, they're going to be looking for the one thing that makes you different, the one thing that makes it easy for them to say yes when they're short landing spot after their dinner or game on a Friday night and they open up their mobile phone and do a brewery near me. You bet the first 10 that come up, if they even make it to the homepage of the website, it's going to be the thing that makes them different, that stands out, that causes them to pause. So when you're talking about non-alcoholic craft offerings, it's no different. What's in it for the customer? How's it unique? What makes your non-alc beverage different? When you talk about the brewery itself, I'll tell you what, if you're promoting the fact that you have non-alc options, that's already a differentiator. We're going to talk about that. What's your voice and personality? Give it kind of an edge, not just plain vanilla. And do you promise an experience, promise award-winning beers? For us, it really comes down to what your brand story is. And we've come up with this brand story framework, which we really feel is the key to all of your marketing and sales. You might say it's just a sentence, but think of how important this sentence is when it drives all of your strategy, all of your budgeting, all of your outbound marketing efforts for the next 5 to 10 years. It's a business that takes some bold action to deliver value to guests who deserve more. Now let's break this down with some practical examples. We'll use a brewing situation, but the same is true for wineries, distilleries, functional beverages, kombucheries, meaderies, cideries, any business for that matter. Your business might be a brewery, a cidery, Takes bold action. You could introduce or blend or brew to deliver some value. It could be a rotating set of tap handles, stylistic beers for the season, a whole lineup of food trucks. And guess who deserve more? For us, we're in Denver. And so live music is a thing. So if I have an interest in live music, you might be able to appeal to me at a slightly different level because you talked about an interest of mine. So if we were to play that out, it might look like some fictional brewery, Discover Ale Works, brews a selection of rotating beer styles for guests to enjoy with live music and Denver's most sought after food trucks. It's a one-liner, basically says what we're about. And if I saw that and I was looking at 20 others, I would know exactly what I was getting from Discover Ale Works. Now, throw a non-alc option in there. See how the brand story might change a little bit. Discover Ale Works offers house-made beer, seltzers, and non-alc options for those very same guests to enjoy with live music and popular Denver food trucks. Now, it's subtle, but again, if that's the only introduction you're ever going to have to a potential customer, and they are in the mindset of non-alc or part of their crew is non-alc for whatever reason, then immediately you've connected at a deeper level than anyone else who doesn't show that option as available. But we would suggest that you have to lean into it. Is it just an add-on? If it's just an add-on, then you're not going to talk about it. If it's just water or soda in the cooler, then it's probably not worth saying. But if you've actually invested the time and effort and money into giving a true to style, non-alcoholic craft beer option, tell people about it. They'll appreciate you for it. We're getting into the final slides of this, but understand that this plays out in a number of different ways. It's on your website right at the very top. So few people go beyond your homepage. Give them their one-liner at the very top to help them choose you over others. Social, I like to say that NA beer tastes and parties just like a craft beer. And when you look at that, you start to see how that could play out on social. You could start to show a broader base of experience to people where it's not just, the award-winning this or the fruit splash still frame of that. It's actually non-alcoholic as it relates to your overall experience that you're giving guests. E-commerce, yeah, you can sell it online for sure. It doesn't have the same requirements or restrictions that selling alcohol online does. You can sell it through all the normal channels, Drizzly and Amazon and others. Now, it's still dictated by state to state, of which there are a couple restrictions, but better than 40 states allow for state to state shipping with non-alc, a potential new sales channel. Public relations, we want to talk about how we're more inclusive. People want an environment that is welcoming for a number of different reasons and in a number of different ways, and non-alc just adds to that story. Talk about it. Email, give non-alc some love in your email. You talk about the events that are coming up, the food trucks, the award-winning this, and the position on politics that. Give non-alc a little bit of real estate there. And then events gives you a whole new option to either create new events, like we talked about, sponsorships, a bike race or something like that, or just expand the breadth and depth of your existing events. Tasting room, deliberately market it. Show people that it's available. There are opportunities for cross-promotion. There's a whole new set of options with respect to donations at that point, because it's not just donating beer to the local event. It could be donating non-alcoholic beer to a local cleanup event that's multi-age. It still has you present within the local and regional conversation maybe in a slightly different way. Retail, think about non-traditional outlets where you might be able to drop product off, gyms, things like this. Restaurants, we want to be that preferred non-alc can that's on the menu at the local and regional restaurants, let alone something bigger like a chain if you have that kind of muscle. Community clubs and enthusiast groups. And then lastly, get some eyes on it, enter some competitions, be rewarded for what you've done to advance not only your brand, but the category of non-alcoholic. Sampling is big. It's, again, a bit of a hurdle to get by when you talk about non-alcoholic versus the craft counterparts. So get the product in people's hands. Have people sample it, either in your tasting room, at sponsored local events, or even in a broader way. If you've got the bankroll as well as the field team in order to sample on a broader level. And then obviously test and learn, track and report, which helps make you smarter and more strategic about how you deploy those resources. Sometimes people are going to say no, and it's okay. We just have to manage that feedback because non-alc is not for everybody. Think about every comment as constructive. Doesn't taste the same. Well, yeah, maybe it doesn't taste exactly the same to what you're used to, but is it refreshing? Does it quench your thirst? What's the point? Well, the point is people are asking for it, and we are answering that need. It's not a beer. I beg to differ. It's actually brewed pretty much exactly like a beer, same ingredients, and it's just not good. Caution here, because if it's not good, it might be a production issue. I think we have to be honest with ourselves and put out products that we ourselves like to drink, not put out something that is going to get this kind of a response, because out of the gates, this could mean the death of that sub-brand of yours. So equip your team with answers to those questions because they will be asked. Pairing, keto, these are important. Gluten reduced, gluten friendly, gluten free. When you're talking to a more health conscious consumer, they're going to pick apart the brand so that they can feel 100% confident in consuming it. Will it get you drunk? How about that comment that it has the same ABV as off the shelf orange juice? I always like it when people kind of tilt their head and scratch their head about that one. How does it taste? What are the ingredients? All of these are just a sample of the questions that you and your team could get asked when you have that non-alcoholic offering. Be prepared to answer them with confidence. That's only going to build momentum around what you're selling. And then learn, evolve, and grow. It's new. It's new for a lot of breweries. You may be in it already. You may have taken some lumps. You may be able to tell others watching this video about the shortcuts, maybe some of the learnings. Again, you're helping everybody elevate the non-alcoholic category. Maybe you've tried to come up with a recipe and you're kind of leaning towards buying something commercial. Wherever you are in the process, take a first step, learn from it, and then continue to grow, because this is a macro trend that is not going away. Set a budget, just like any product launch, any sales initiative, any marketing campaign. Non-alc as a product line and as a category needs budget behind it. You don't want to introduce something that you're not able to support for the short to midterm. Track things with check increases, see how it's affecting your customers. And again, sometimes you're going to want to start with best practice. Instead of taking a year to get into it, maybe start with a purchased commercial brand and then develop a more owned position over time. Because non-alc beer is marketed and sold just like craft beer. We just have to be a little sensitive to the occasions under which a craft beer drinker would easily say yes. And as always, we love to encourage people to look at their brewery, look at their offerings from just a slightly different perspective, that of a consumer perspective, in order to really understand how to meet that need and where non-alcoholic beers fit. I'd encourage you to visit marketyourcraft.com/guides. We've got a whole series of one-offs, step-by-step instructions on approaching some of these marketing and sales techniques. And if you use the code CBP Fall 2022, you can have any one of those for free. I want to thank you for the opportunity to present today. And again, my name is Scott Kolbe. I work with the company Market Your Craft, and we'd love to talk to you about planning a strategy for your non-alcoholic offerings.